Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. I'm Jenae, filling in for Vinnie, and the subject of our investigation is the death of little Quinton Simon in Savannah, Georgia. The disappearance of this toddler from his home in 2022 sparked national attention. It seemed like he vanished into thin air. His mother, Leilani Simon, pleaded publicly for his return, telling police that the toddler was abducted. But over time, this investigation changed to see this grieving mother as a prime suspect. Here's the story. 20-month-old Quinton Simon was living with his mother, Leilani, her boyfriend, Danny, and his grandparents, Billy, Joe, and Thomas. On October 5th, 2022, at 9:40 a.m., there was a call to 911 to report this little boy missing. The investigation began as a missing persons case. Was this child abducted? Did he sneak away into the nearby woods? Soon, though, the nature of this investigation would change. It became a homicide investigation with the attention focused on Quinton's mom. Then, the true crime community spotlight started to shine on Leilani Simon and her family. Protesters outside of their home demanded answers and made accusations. The police investigation led to an expansive search of a landfill, and eventually remains of little Quinton were found. Leilani was charged and locked up, arrested for his murder, and now a jury and the public are finally hearing the evidence against Leilani Simon. And tonight, we're looking for answers to what happened to little Quinton. This case is one that's now in front of a jury. And during the prosecution's opening statement, he outlined the state's theory of this case against Leilani Simon, that there was a drug-fueled rage that happened within her. And after an argument she had with her boyfriend, Danny, that Leilani killed her child and then drove to a nearby dumpster minutes later and discarded the little boy like trash.
She's up all alone, physically uncomfortable, emotionally unhappy, unstable to some degree. And around 1 a.m. probably, she kills Quinton. She takes his body and puts it in Dodge Journey, Georgia tag. And she begins the cover-up. The cover-up is not just the lies to the police. The cover-up starts immediately. A little after 1 a.m., she drives down Buckhalter Road, which turns to the right here, but it's still Buckhalter Road at that turn. And comes into Ogeechee Road right here. And she pulls into this mobile home plaza. It's right here. Mostly what you're seeing is trees, but there are mobile homes in here. This is Azalea Mobile Home Plaza. And there's a convenient stand-up dumpster sort of hidden away under some tree cover in the tree line there. And she throws Quinton's body away like a piece of trash at about 1:17 in the morning. November 18th. It's a memorable day for the people who are involved in this landfill search, because they find Quinton, and he's not in good shape. Okay, they find him in pieces, mostly bones, a foot. It's not as though he's in one place on that search deck. They're finding bones in different lines, spread out. He's torn apart. What I do not expect to hear is exactly how the defendant killed Quinton. And that's because she covered it up. It's because she got rid of the body. All right, the evidence will show that her specific intent from the outset was that he never be found at all. And him being found in pieces, little bitty pieces, was the next best thing. The judge will tell you that in a case like this, we do not have to prove exactly how the defendant killed Quinton. Under these circumstances, how could you?
And that moment there, at the conclusion of the prosecution's opening statement, brings us to our first question of this hour. How did Quinton Simon die? And can we know? Let's bring in to break all of this down our guests who are with us. Podcast host and Pop Crime TV reporter Lauren Conlon is with us, and retired medical examiner and forensic pathologist Dr. Michelle Dupree. Thank you both for being here. Lauren, let me start with you. Based on what we know about this case, are there some theories about how Quinton died while he was there inside of the home with his mother?
Yes, Julia, it is so tragic. It's hard to even put into words, but what is believed to have happened is that Leilani, upon arguing with her boyfriend Danny, she possibly did some drugs, some cocaine, if you will, and she beat little Quinton to death with an object before driving to the dumpster at the trailer park and disposing of his body.
And let me hear from you, Dr. Dupree, as well, because it's just so hard to hear the details of this case where the prosecutor is saying he was found in pieces in that dumpster. How difficult is it when these investigators are trying to piece things together and they have a body that's gone through as much as this little boy's remains were to actually determine what originally happened?
Of course, it can be very difficult, but depending on the exact circumstances, we can often piece together those pieces, if you will, and we can tell approximately what happened to the person, especially if it is something like blunt trauma. That has a very specific look to the way that the bones are. We can also look at any fractures of the bones or anything like that. And we can get a pretty good story that it was at least blunt trauma and it wasn't something else like a sharp force injury or a gunshot wound. So we can tell a lot by that.
So you're saying that even if there's just skeletal remains, there's still a way to determine if the fractures were from the actual incident or from what happened to him in the landfill or the process of getting to that landfill, Dr. Dupree?
Yes, absolutely. In many cases, we can do exactly that. And basically, it depends on the condition of those bones and what we find. When a skull, for example, is hit with a blunt object, there is something called beveling, and we can tell if that's, it was a strike or something like that. Sometimes we can also tell by the indentations in the bones, what type of an object, not the exact object, but we could tell maybe if it was a pipe or if it was some other type of object.
And I want to read the official indictment in this case for Leilani Simon because it revealed a clue about how he may have died, or at least what authorities knew at that time. And it's under count 2, felony murder in this case. And the document reads that the accused, Leilani Simon, did make an assault upon her son, Quinton Simon, with an object that, when used offensively, did result in serious bodily injury. The accused did, in the commission of this offense, cause Quinton's death. Now, Lauren, it's chilling to even think about what potentially happened. But, we're seeing how Leilani Simon was initially after she reported her own son missing, claimed that she didn't know anything about it. But authorities say that it's an object that was used, and you mentioned the beating. We don't know yet about how her defense is going to go, but her mother-in-law, or her mother rather, was recorded by her son, the person who was the father of Quinton, who was not in Leilani's life. And there was this mention of the possibility of a drowning in a bathtub. Hasn't been anything on the record with that in mind, but your thoughts on that potentially being something else that could be? Is there anything to disprove that?
As of right now, there's nothing to disprove that Leilani did beat him with an object. This was supposed to have happened pretty late at night. So my theory, my working theory here, is that she was doing some drugs. She was very upset. And if you're a mother, you know that toddlers sometimes can wake up. I feel like Quinton possibly woke up and he bothered Leilani, and that's how she reacted. The prosecution actually showed a video in their opening statement of Leilani appearing to have suicidal ideations, and she mentions 3 of her children, and she mentions her oldest first, then Quinton, or actually, I'm sorry, she mentions Quinton last, I believe, but what she does is she kind of stops herself and has to think about what to say about Quinton. Her other kids, she's like, I love you, I'll miss you, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, Quinton, she's like, he's my middle. He's so happy. And it was just a bit telling.
That's interesting analysis, Lauren. That's the video there that you're talking about where she's driving. She doesn't appear to always be looking at the road, but she's talking about ending her life because she's so upset with her boyfriend. Is she suicidal there, just according to her own words? How do you think a jury is going to take that when they are trying to decide about homicide, if they're looking at homicide versus accident, Lauren?
Right. I mean, they are looking very, very closely at this, as well as Leilani as a defendant. I mean, you saw in the opening statements, the video that was just played, when they're talking about what happened to Quinton and how he was found, she doesn't even shed a tear. You can see she grabs a box of tissues for her crocodile tears, but that's it.
Dr. Dupree, well, let's start with Quinton. He was in that landfill for over a month. Are you surprised at the conditions of his remains where it just was impossible for us to get more information according to authorities?
No, not really, because when bones are exposed or when a person is in a landfill and, they begin to decompose and they're exposed to the elements, a lot of times that is all that is left is the bones. But again, we can still tell an awfully lot from that. And the body is remarkable. We can learn so much from that. Not maybe the exact item that was used, but again, we can tell if it was blunt trauma or something of that nature.
All right, our guests are going to stay with us. We do have to get to a break, but when we come back, we've heard a lot of the prosecution's theory. But what is Leilani Simon's defense?
Whatever happened, somebody picked that baby up out of that playmate and they took it with them.
Are you incapable of telling the truth, Brian?
On the premiere of Interview with a Killer.
The problem is people don't believe me.
A gruesome torture caught on camera.
You told the police that you shot her because you wanted a Hollywood moment.
The monster behind the memory card murders is speaking out.
That sounds like a guilty man who's coming clean.
Interview with a Killer. Series premiere Sunday, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
There was no accident. There was no somebody falling. There was no horse playing. There was no door being left over and a child walked outside. There was none of that. None of it at all. Whatever happened, somebody picked that baby up out of that playmate and they took it with them. That's what they did. There's no way he can get on that planet on his own. No way. At all. Now let me tipped over by his brother just where somebody picked him up. Or there's a hole in there to step on. He could not get out of there. So I don't know what happened to him. I don't know where he is. I don't know if something happened when I was back home. I don't know. I don't know who to trust. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know if his family does the worst thing to you. So how am I supposed to know? I don't know.
That was Leilani Simon. She's telling the investigators what she believes happened to her son. She's saying he must have been abducted from his playpen the morning that he disappeared because she's the one who called 911. She says prosecutors say rather that Leilani is the one who's responsible for her son's death and that there was a cover-up that followed and that she was lying in that video. They also say that she discarded his body in a dumpster and then lied to keep herself out of trouble. Now, the defense presented a brief opening statement in this trial, and they didn't provide much insight into what her side of the story may be in front of the jury.
The state has a conclusion. The core conclusion is that Leilani Marie Simon murdered her child. The evidence will simply not support that bold conclusion. That is why, after we've heard all the evidence and all the argument, the evidence will lead you to one place. and that is a finding with respect to murder and concealing the death of another of not guilty.
All right, you heard there the defense. It was pretty general. The prosecution is wrong, is essentially what was said. The investigation is flawed. But it gets us to our next question this hour, which is, what will be Leilani Simon's defense? Let's bring back in our experts. We have Lauren Conlon with us and Dr. Michelle Dupree. Lauren, what are your theories on what we may see once the defense actually takes the stand? We don't know if the defendant is going to take the stand, but once this case turns over to them, if they start putting on evidence, we may get an idea of what their defense is.
First of all, I thought that opening statement was AI. It was so bad, and it was essentially like he was saying, oh, this is all a rumor. It's just hearsay. And I'm sitting here, not a lawyer, but circumstantial evidence of what we know so far is definitely evidence. But I believe that they are going to pin this on Leilani's boyfriend, Danny. And I just get the sense about this because of a text message that was shown. I believe she sent this to law enforcement or whatever detective she was working with, but she essentially says, I'm tired of lying for Danny. And it's pretty clear to me so far that Danny has no involvement and he really cared for Quinton. So I'm interested to see how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, she was quick to throw not only Danny under the bus, but also Quinton's father, who was miles away. She initially said he may have been the one who drove there and abducted his son. There he is, Henry Bubba Moss. But Dr. Dupree, in terms of trying to prove or disprove whether there are other people involved, would it even be possible determining that with DNA based on the way these remains were found? Would it be protocol to look for DNA in what was found in that landfill?
It's certainly something that could be done. I really think that it would not yield very much because it's just going to be too contaminated. I think it's also going to be very difficult to prove at what point in time did the child die and who was with him at that time. That's always what an issue that we have when a child is murdered or killed, is who was with him, who saw him last, when did it happen, and who was there, who could have prevented it or who could have done it. And so I think that's going to be very difficult to prove. I do think that she is probably going to try and pin it on someone else, absolutely. If worst came to worst, she might even try a defense of it was an accident. A lot of times, especially in child abuse cases, the parent or the caregiver will say, well, they were crying, I was upset, he was fussy, and I just wanted him to be quiet. Maybe I hit him too hard or something of that nature.
That is something certainly we could see. Lauren, let me ask you this, another potential theory, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't argue either of those two that you both have brought up, the accident or another person, but could she also try to lean into some sort of mental health episode? Because just watching her as she's talking to police, yes, she is hysterical because her son is missing, but she also seems to be struggling cognitively as well.
Julia, I don't think so, because she is a known drug addict and drug user, and her lies, she just kept spewing them one after another. And I do believe she was coming off of a drug-fueled night. And if you notice in her speech and in her statement, when she's referring to Quinton, she refers to him as that baby. I'm not trying to get technical, but that seems to be distancing to me, and that also could imply guilt. She's distancing herself from her own child because she knows what she did. And you can go back to some of her other statements, that the first one that she made on the news, where she said something like, oh, maybe a family took him that needed a baby. Who thinks like that? Who says that out loud? Who doesn't sit there and say, find my child, do whatever you can to find my child? All of this combined, I'm not buying the mental health thing.
Lauren, you're mentioning the distancing, and that's something the prosecution has brought up as well. They say that Quinton was being treated differently and that was influenced by the fact that she was so upset with and on the outs with the father of Quinton, separate fathers for the 3 of her children. She was living with the father of the youngest child. But your thoughts on if this was something that was actually rooted in her problematic relationship with his father?
Yes, there are reports that she did treat Quinton differently than her other 2 children, and we saw that in the video when she was struggling for words. I mean, look, 20 months old for a toddler, it's not an easy age. She's got a baby who can't move, and then she's got, I believe her oldest is 5 or maybe 3 at the time. They're a bit more self-sufficient. So you have little Quinton, who is so needy. They can barely talk. They're just learning. So they scream a lot. They have tantrums. My thoughts are that she couldn't handle it. And on top of her drug use and the mounting failure in her relationship, she just decided that she would harm Quinton, and that or allegedly would harm Quinton and take it out on him. And now, unfortunately, she cannot take it back.
And the big question is whether she's going to take the stand. But really quick, Dr. Dupree, what else do you want to see in this case that you think would really impact things that we haven't seen so far?
Well, I think one thing that we have to consider is that if it can be shown that she did drop him off at the landfill, that shows that she tried to cover it up. So she knew what she did was wrong. The other thing is, we often see that a child from a different parent is treated differently. And often in child abuse cases, that's what happens. That child is abused in some way because they're not with the original parent of the child.
Dr. Dupree, thank you so much for your analysis. Lauren Conlon as well. We have to get to a break, and that's where we have to leave it. I'm Julia Jenae, filling in for Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. Welcome to Vinnie Politan Investigates. I'm Julia Jenae, filling in for Vinnie as we continue our investigation into the death of a toddler, Quinton Simon. His mother, Leilani Simon, is on trial for his murder, and the evidence against her includes recordings taken before and after Quinton disappeared, and they show a wide range of emotions from this 22-year-old mother accused of the unthinkable. Here's the story. On October 5th, 2022, 22-year-old Leilani Simon and her boyfriend called 911 to report her toddler missing. They told the police her son Quinton may have been abducted from their Savannah, Georgia home. After that call, a massive search overtook the community. Where was little Quinton? After a month, the toddler's remains were discovered in a Georgia landfill. And prosecutors say the actions of Leilani Simon, his mother, led them there. She has now been charged with his murder, and there are still plenty of questions in this case the prosecutors believe they can answer as they seek justice for little Quinton. In the state's opening statement in this case, prosecutors painted a picture of Leilani Simon unraveling in the months leading up to the death of her 20-month-old toddler, Quinton. Now, the prosecutor described Leilani's volatile relationship with her live-in boyfriend, Danny Youngkin, as the, quote, biggest problem in her life at the time, and even presented a video that was a suicide note Leilani had recorded for him months before Quinton's disappearance. They claimed that another fight with Danny that night on October 4th, 2022, is what sent Leilani into a drug-fueled bender.
I don't feel the love in your touch anymore. And I definitely don't see the love in your eyes anymore. If you truly loved me like you claimed you did, you wouldn't have done all that. Even when I was carrying your child and hating myself every day, crying myself to sleep every night because you did not want to have sex with me. You did not want to love me. You just did not want me.
So that's where she was at. This is her emotional state in the summer, fall of 2022. Around 10 p.m., Quinton is fine. He's just in his crib, in his pack and play for bedtime, okay? And what happens at this point sets off a chain of events that goes over the next couple hours and results in tragedy. And that is that the defendant and Daniel have yet another argument about how he's treating her. This is sometime a little after 10 p.m. And that this is something she told to detectives eventually in some of her interviews. About how he doesn't want her, he doesn't want to touch her, he's not feeling desire for her like he used to. And we've already talked about this is a major trigger for her. This is the biggest emotional issue going on in her life, and it's significant. It drove her to the brink in the video that you've watched. This is not a minor thing for her. So she's going to get drugs to try to make herself feel better. This is a screenshot of some GPS plots from her phone that the police eventually made after getting into her phone. You can see Highway 204 here. And this red kind of blob up here is a series of GPS points showing that she's at the drug dealer's house on Arkwright Lane from about 10:45 p.m. to 10:55. And she's scoring drugs to use that night because she doesn't like the way she's feeling. What she's doing is she's going on a bender. You'll hear her admit to this eventually with the police. She didn't want to talk about it initially, but you'll hear that she eventually acknowledged that she was up kind of frantically using drugs for an extended period of time while everybody else in the house is asleep and out of play. You'll hear her talk about it. I would hit a line, I would go outside, I would smoke a blunt to kind of bring myself down, maybe smoke a cigarette, then I'd hit another line and repeat the cycle. So she's in her house by herself, physically uncomfortable because of her dental issue, emotionally wrecked because of what's going on with her and Danny that's resurfaced again this night. And around 1 a.m. probably, she kills Quinton. And she throws Quinton's body away like a piece of trash at about 1:17 in the morning.
Now, based on what we've seen so far in the case against her, we are asking this question. We want to know, regarding Leilani Simon, what was her state of mind that night? And we've got experts that can give us some great insight into this. We have clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and author of the book, The New Rules of Attachment, Dr. Judy Ho, and child forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Bober. It's great to have you both on. Dr. Judy Ho, I want to start with you because you're the perfect person perhaps to weigh in on what seemed to be an attachment that this defendant has to her boyfriend from that video. What do you think her state of mind was in these months leading up to Quinton's disappearance?
Well, Julia, it looked like she was so distraught, so emotionally dysregulated. She was in a moving vehicle, driving the car, it seemed, and essentially just completely not able to make good decisions, even speak in an intelligible way at times. This is somebody whose frontal lobe, the part of our brains that allow us to do higher order thinking, to make executive decisions, that was not the part of her brain that was in charge based on that video. And if that was a decompensation that had been happening for weeks, even months, you could imagine that this is not a person who was maybe in her best mind, her right mind, to be able to make good parenting decisions for a child.
Dr. Bober, what do you think about what we've seen so far based on that night? Quinton there in the home with his mother, who had 2 other young children as well. She's admitted to this drug-fueled, the prosecution has said there was this drug-fueled bender, but it's something she lied about repeatedly. But your thoughts about that night?
Well, you know, when mothers kill their children, or so-called maternal filicide, we look at a variety of risk factors, and she almost checks the box of almost every risk factor, right? Probably suffering from a mood disorder, feeling suicidal, substance use, an unstable relationship. So there are a lot of concerning things here, and although she is not convicted and she is simply accused, there are some very worrisome things here that would lead me to believe that it's possible that this had a horrific ending.
Let's listen to Leilani's own words. Prosecutors described her saying in a recorded phone call about the effect of the drugs on her in a call with her boyfriend, Danny Youngkin.
And this is a bad situation. Right? This is a volatile, dangerous situation. And that's because you'll hear something that she later said during the investigation on a recorded call, on a recorded phone call to Daniel, who was cooperating with the police and trying to help them gain information about the effect that cocaine has on her. It's not just fun for her. You'll hear her say that it makes her angry and impulsive.
I will not touch. I'll never touch cooking memory. And I become angry and impulsive for a moment.
And so those are the conditions. She's up all alone, physically uncomfortable, emotionally unhappy, unstable to some degree.
Dr. Judy Ho, what is that telling you about Leilani Simon's potential state of mind the night that Quinton went missing?
Well, we know that stimulant drugs do have a huge risk of creating more impulsive actions, more aggression, more difficulties regulating their emotions in the person who is using them, and certainly the ones who abuse them. And if she used a high amount of such stimulants, and on top of the emotional dysregulation we already saw in that previous video, you can see how dangerous it could really become. The person is not making decisions based on thinking about long-term, what would be the best consequences of their actions. They are acting in the moment, and she herself has said, this is the effect that this substance has on me. So there's some awareness there of what it's doing to her. And there's probably a part of her that was self-medicating, trying to escape her problems by seeking drug use, especially after such a horrific fight with her boyfriend.
Dr. Bober, weigh in on that, the self-medication. We don't know what the exact offense of the team that's helping Leilani Simon is, but could that be an avenue in your opinion?
So I totally agree with Dr. Ho. I mean, you're dealing with someone who probably already is very self-dysregulated. You add a drug like a cocaine on top of that, which is a psychostimulant, makes them more impulsive, more irritable, produces a lack of frustration tolerance. But I will say that, you know, using a substance like cocaine, which would be voluntary intoxication, would not be a valid defense. So that may muddy the water a little bit for the defense.
Could that use, Dr. Bober, affect her memory?
Probably not. It certainly could affect the way the memory is encoded, and it may affect the recall. And that may be something that they may try to use as a defense tactic. But again, because it's voluntary intoxication, I don't think it's going to be a valid avenue for defense.
All right, we still have yet to see what Leilani Simon's defense is going to be there inside of the courtroom, but we are, of course, seeing a lot from the prosecution. We have to get to a break. My guests are going to stay with us. Still to come, we're going to be looking at who was responsible for Quinton at the time that he went missing.
Sometimes she has full custody, so really it's just a call it paper trail, call it what you want. Yeah, it's pretty much just her paper talking. Whenever she got custody, but I was the one every day. I was there every day.
One of the most successful true crime TV shows ever.
This is crazy.
Now has a new home on America's original true crime obsession, 48 Hours on Court TV. Coming up next on Court TV.
The trial of a wife who's accused of killing her husband and then burning his remains.
Defendant murdered and desecrated her own husband.
The Burn Pile Murder Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
Smoke cigarettes inside and smoke weed inside and take it outside and talk and see any of that. It's not
That was Leilani Simon telling investigators about her living situation on Buckhalter Road in Savannah, Georgia. She was living in the home with her boyfriend, Danny, her brother, Paul, her 3 young children, her stepfather, and her mother, Billie Joe. It was the home of her mother. And Leilani described in that interview her mother as a convicted felon. Interestingly, though, Billie Joe is the one who actually had custody of Leilani's children. Now, court documents indicate that Billie Joe Howell was Quinton's non-parental custodian, and Leilani Simon is the non-custodial parent. So while we are looking at what happened to little Quinton, what happened in those hours where he was unaccounted for inside of that home, Billie Joe may have had custody of little Quinton, but she didn't appear to be around on that night when Quinton was last seen. So that brings us to our final question of this hour. Who was responsible for Quinton, especially that night in October of 2022? Let's bring in our guests, Dr. Judy Ho and Dr. Daniel Bober, still with us. Now, Dr. Judy Ho, tell me about what you think about Quinton not being in the custody officially of his mother, Leilani, who is now accused of his murder.
Well, I think that there's a lot of different things that could lead to her not actually being with him as often as we might think as his mother. And if she's that emotionally dysregulated, if there were so many difficulties in terms of her actually being able to focus on the parenting as opposed to her extreme focus, it seems, on her romantic relationship, there's a lot of different reasons why that parental support was not there. And that, I think, unfortunately, would actually stack up against Leilani in terms of her defense. You know, where were you? Why weren't you watching your child? How much do you even care about this child? Or were you just using this child as a pawn in your relationship with your boyfriend?
And Dr. Bober, if you see situations like this where custody has shifted, is it unusual for a child to still be, in some regard, cared for by the non-custodial parent?
Listen, I see a lot of chaos in this home. I see a lot of overstimulation. I think the boundaries were very poor. The roles were very poorly defined. So you have to wonder why she wasn't around. Was there a history of mental illness that made her unable to cope? Did she lack the problem-solving skills? Was she so dysregulated that she could not be the primary caregiver? These are all important questions. And as I said earlier in the broadcast, one reason that mothers will kill their children is also to get back at their spouse or their lover. Now, obviously, it's way too early to tell, and we can only speculate, but there does seem to be a lot of dysfunction in this relationship, and the child may have served as a pawn in the final analysis.
It's a heartbreaking story all around, and the more that we hear about it, let's listen to one of the interviews that was played. It's investigators talking to Leilani Simon, and she's describing the custody situation that she did have with her mother, Billie Joe Howell.
Do you feel that, you know, given your mom's situation and your situation, she was still the best person for you to have direct custody to?
Yeah, she from the time that I first gave the custody to until now. Yeah, no matter what, I gave her the custody to. She hasn't had custody over them for not even a year yet. Not even a year.
But you see, Ma, I'm trying to understand this. She's away. She's, you know, maybe out of town for a month, 2 months at a time.
Sometimes 3. Sometimes
she has full custody. So really, it's just call it a paper drill, call it what you want to.
Yeah, it's pretty much just paper talking and whatever. She got custody, but I was the one every day. I was there every day.
Dr. Judy Ho, I got to ask if this is strange to you. Now, Billie Joe Howell, after the arrest of her daughter, there were some issues that she had outside of this case. She has not been charged with anything in relation to Quinton Simon's murder. But do you find it strange that she was allowing Leilani to still be the primary caretaker, it seems, especially that night?
Well, as Dr. Bober mentioned, there's a lot of chaos in this family unit. And no, I don't find it surprising that sometimes family members will essentially disobey custody orders or whatever the court is actually requiring to allow their family members to still see the child. And it's interesting because in the video clip that you just showed, Leilani is actually very defiant in a way. Like, hey, look, this is just on paper. But I was actually his primary caregiver, and I was there every single day. I'm still the one doing all of the work. So if there was a determination earlier that she was not fit to be the custodian parent, and yet she was getting all of this access, you have to wonder the kind of developmental concerns that you might have with her potential dysregulation, being around this child, not making great decisions, and then the actual legal custodial parent in this situation allowing that to happen for whatever reason.
Yeah, there are filings in this case that we've learned through our own investigation where the state of Georgia was trying to get a reimbursement for the funds that it seemingly paid out to Billy Joe Howell for that custody to get that back from Leilani Simon. But perhaps in this home, it's felt like it was a safe place. Dr. Bober, they all were living together. It wasn't just Leilani with her son. And we even have the stepfather, Thomas, who testified or told police that he checked on the little boy when he got home from work, looked at him, saw that he was okay in his playpen, played with him a bit, and then went to bed.
You know something, every family has secrets, and I'm also a child psychiatrist, so I see this a lot of times. They don't follow the parenting arrangement, they don't follow the custody arrangement, so it's very difficult to really know what's going on. But again, because Leilani was not the primary caregiver, I question why that was, and I think more might come out that answers that question.
Do you think she'll be pointing the finger at anyone else, Dr. Ho? We've seen a lot from her. We've talked about her state of mind. We don't really know where she's going to go in terms of her defense. But with all of this surrounding custody and whether or not she should not have had custody, do you think we'll see her defense embrace that and say she already had this court order in place?
Yeah, it's very possible that she's going to reverse essentially the videotape statement. Of course, the prosecution is going to make something if there is that type of contradiction. But she may say, hey, look, I wasn't even the custodial parent. How could I have been involved in this? I wasn't really that involved in my son's life. She could completely backpedal. But we have this video evidence. And so I think that it's going to be tough. But we see this all the time. This isn't uncommon where, again, you know, parents and custodial parents and whatever the legal arrangement is not being respected. And then you do wonder, well, who was the child being cared by? And everybody is deflecting responsibility. So that could happen here.
Our thanks to you, Dr. Ho and Dr. Bober, for being with us, breaking down this case. It's a difficult one, but it's an important one because little Quinton's story, it raises so many more questions about what his life was like leading up to his death. And though we may never know exactly what happened, how he died there inside of that home, this is a tragedy that highlights how the most vulnerable among us, they can slip through the cracks. And it happened in this case, no doubt. Despite that court order to remove him from his mother's custody, he still ended up back under her care and ultimately in a landfill. For Quinton and other children like him, we can do better. That would be justice served. I'm Julia Jenae, filling in for Vinnie Politan tonight. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.